Good evening and welcome to CoralVision's annual legislative preview show. My name is Eric Dickerson and I'm the production coordinator for CoralVision, your community television station. This evening we'll be talking with Senator Bob Dvorsky and Representative Dave Jacoby to try to help you understand the nuts and bolts of the legislative process for the upcoming second part of the 86th General Assembly of the Iowa Legislature. Hello and welcome to CoralVision's annual legislative preview show. Each year we try to give you, the residents of Coralville, an opportunity to hear from your legislators about the business of the upcoming legislative session. I'll be here today with Senator Bob Dvorsky and Representative Dave Jacoby, and let's just start right off with Senator Dvorsky. Welcome, Senator. Thank you for coming.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for doing this again.
All right. I want to jump right into a key issue for you in your committee position and your status in the Senate, and that is the budget process. Can you outline for me your role in the budget process and how that will unfold during this session?
Okay. I'm the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and Appropriations is the committee that deals with funding for the state, all the state programs. Essentially what we do as a caucus, the Senate Democrats, this has been going on the last few years because of divided control of the legislature. We've essentially had three budget proposals the last few years, sort of one from the Senate Democrats. The governor, of course, has to submit his. The governor's proposal, usually a proposal from the Senate Democrats and one from the House Republicans. And then what has happened the last few years, and I anticipate the same thing this year, the last 5 years anyway, this will be the 6th year of divided control, that the Senate Democrats and House Republicans, who are both the majority parties in those chambers, will sit down and try and work out the budget proposals.
Okay.
After we come up with a proposal, first of all, the governor presents his, and then we'll come up with the overall proposal, budget proposal, and assume the House Republicans will do also. So then the House Republicans, Senate Democrats will sit down and try and work out what we can come up with those budget proposals in mind.
Okay, so the leadership of each chamber will sit down in sort of a...
Well, it's normally the ones dealing with appropriations, so it's it's usually three on each side. In the past, it's been Senator Gronstal, leader, President Yoakum, and myself as appropriations chair. And then on the House side, we have some new players this year. Linda Altmeyer will be the new speaker. Chris Hagenaw will be the new majority leader, and then Pat Grassley will be the new appropriations chair in the House. So those six of us will be sitting down working on the budget. That's the way it's been for the past 5 years, with slightly different personnel involved.
Okay. So how do you guys prioritize that process? What issues do you address first, say in January or February? Is there a very specific calendar for how that goes?
Well, in theory, the way the appropriation process is supposed to work, and it's a little different because of the divided control, but there are, what, 7, I guess, appropriation subcommittees, and they meet in mornings during the week, usually Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday mornings, and they go over their particular budget. We have education, economic development. There's essentially 7 budget areas that people work on, justice, that type of thing. And they are joint House and Senate, Democrat and Republican committees that work on those. And they go through all the hearings early on in the session. And then near to the end of the session, then they start proposing bills for, say, the education subcommittee will have a bill brought to full appropriations, which I chair, and then that will pass out of there, and then it will go onto the floor of the Senate, then over to the House, or whichever. We normally switch each year which body starts which bill. So say you started education last year first in the Senate, this year we start in the House, that sort of thing.
Okay. So the budget doesn't come through as one large omnibus. It's sort of divided up.
7 or 8, and a justice system. There's 2 bills out of there. There's 2 bills out of justice system because one dealing with the courts, funding the courts, and then the second one dealing with the justice system, which is corrections, public defense, public safety, attorney generals, border patrol, that kind of thing. And then on our infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, there's a bill that's transportation funding, and that's mostly all road use tax money that funds the DOT. And then the infrastructure budget is the RIF money, the gaming revenues money bill.
Okay.
Rebuild Iowa infrastructure bill.
Okay.
And so there are 2 bills out of that one, 2 bills out of justice. And then we have health and human services, which is an enormous bill. We have administration regulation. We have ag and DNR. What else? Economic development. As I said, education. Maybe leaving somebody out. Anyway, but
so it's a long, detailed list. You can't help but
but this year, because it's an election year, and I think people want to hopefully get going, get out of session. We're going to be meeting right away the first week with our people on our appropriation subs to try and move forward to get something going quickly.
All right. So the governor's proposal is presented on the 12th, is that right?
Yes. Well, he presents, sometimes he doesn't have all the detail done by the 12th, but somewhere in that week they'll have all the information done. But he'll present it in the State of the State speech on Tuesday.
Okay, all right. What do you expect from that proposal in terms of points of conflict with the Senate Democrats?
Well, it's going to be, it's going to be another tough budget year. Last year was a tough budget year, and we knew this one was going to be tough going in. The revenues, they revised the revenues down a little bit, but it's still a 4% increase for fiscal 17, and we'll see what the governor comes up with. What has happened the last 5 years is the numbers have moved around a little bit, but last year, in fact, the number the governor proposed and the number the Senate Democrats proposed was the same number. Now, we spent the money differently, but it was the same number. And then the House Republicans were lower than that. And then through the process of negotiations, we ended up using the House Republicans number. But so that's kind of what happens. What has happened the last several years is usually the House Republicans will come up with a really fairly low number. Then the Senate Democrats will be higher, and the governor will be either in between or probably around the Senate Democrats number. But to date, we haven't been able to get the House Republicans to up their number. So.
Okay. Well.
It's really a lot of inside baseball stuff. I mean, people don't really understand. I mean, it's outside the normal process because of the divided control. I mean, the normal process would be these appropriation subs would meet together and come up with some numbers and then, run that through and sometimes we've had separate bills in each of those appropriation subs. I mean, the Senate Democrats run one bill out and the House Republicans another one, and that even complicates it further. So. And
it seems like there's some calculus between the governor's position and the House Republicans' position, where the governor is being very calculated about how he wants to appear in what he proposes, even though he knows that things will actually turn out more like what the House.
Right, and he's, to the governor's staff's credit, they've tried to get the House Republicans to move up their numbers all these years, and they've never done it. So.
Okay, so all right. Well, what kind of influence do the revenue projections or the revenue figures that will be coming in over the next few weeks? I mean, when do those numbers arrive? What do we already know, and when will we know, in a more certain way, what revenues will look like for this year?
Well, the Revenue Estimating Conference met December 10th, I believe. Anyway, and that's the number we have to use. It's statutorily the number we have to use for the budget. Now, the only thing that changes, they meet again in March, And should they lower their estimate, we would have to lower it. But if they raise their estimate, we don't get the opportunity to raise it. We still have to use the December number.
Oh, all right. Okay.
So we use the December 10th number that the Revenue Estimating Conference has come up with and go from there.
And we have a legal requirement for a balanced budget in Iowa.
Yes, we have a legal requirement for a balanced budget. So my job, I actually have to do my job in Des Moines and get a budget done. I mean, a lot of it is unique in that a lot of other committees, they don't really have to do anything. But if you're on an appropriation committee, you actually have to do something. You have to get those budgets done.
You have to make sure things get all buttoned up.
Right.
Awesome.
Right. So.
So I'm going to move on to
Yes.
another issue that I know that you know a lot about, and perhaps you can explain better for me, and that is the regents, the regents who govern our university system in Iowa. Can you say a few words about how those regents are selected, and perhaps about recent proposals for alternative forms of selection, and what role the legislature or the governor play in that process?
Okay. The regents, there are 9 members on the regents. They're appointed by the governor. So this is Terry Branstad's regents.
Right.
This is, I don't think there are even any more. There might be a couple that were appointed by Governor Culver who are still there. But anyway, the governor appoints the regents. And generally they elect their own president, but it's usually, I mean, they do elect their own president among the members, but it's usually whoever the governor wants. Essentially, and that's Mr. Rastetter right now, Bruce Rastetter. So, but the Senate has to confirm the regents, and that's 2/3 votes. So you have to get 34 votes out of the Iowa Senate to get confirmed to be on the Board of Regents. Okay. And that's our sort of check on that. And I was kind of surprised that people don't remember things, but I believe it was 2 years ago, we actually, the Iowa Senate gave the quote-unquote death penalty to a couple of the governor's nominees that we didn't confirm. One of his nominees had been on the regents for a couple terms, Craig Lang, who had been president of the regents and really had not done well by the University of Iowa and a lot of other things and had a lot of problems. Yeah. So he was not confirmed. And then another gentleman, I'm blanking on his name, who was put up to fill up a vacancy on the regents. They
were turned down.
He really didn't, he really seemed way out of his element to be on the regents. So those 2 were turned down. Okay. And so then the governor appointed 2 people in the interim. Former Senator Larry McKibben, who I served with, and Milt Dokovich from Waterloo area. And they served in the interim, and then last year they were up for confirmation and they were confirmed. Okay. So essentially the way it was sort of viewed is these were maybe less stringent regents or whatever, maybe more moderate. I don't know if they are or not, but they seem to be better fit than the people that we had not confirmed.
So you're saying that although these are political appointees attached to the governor, you have a pretty good feeling about their level of professionalism and independence. Right. So
and then after that, we also confirmed 4 other regents in the last year because of the vacancies.
And the total number on the board?
There's a total of 9.
Okay.
So one would be the student, she's a student at UNI, and then 3 others that we confirmed one like maybe 2 years ago, and then last year 2 others that are new regents. So the Board of Regents is fairly new, a lot of new members on there.
Oh, okay. So regarding the controversy with the new President Harold,
right?
Do you feel like the process worked? And what shall we do going forward?
Well, you say the process. There isn't any process that I'm aware of lined out by law on how you should conduct a presidential search. It's all up to the regents. So they could have had a closed search had they wanted to do that. but they didn't. So they had an open search, and they moved forward with it. And that was all done with the Regents under Mr. Rastetter as president of the Regents. Now, people...
So there was nothing inappropriate about the way they went about?
No, nothing illegal.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, nothing illegal about it anyway.
Okay.
And obviously people were really concerned about the whole process and everything. Well, the concern ought to be the governor. He's the one who appointed Mr. Rastetter. And we did confirm him the first time around, but he'd never served. And, you know, now they're 6-year terms, so he's still there.
Yeah.
The Iowa Senate can't do anything about Bruce Rastetter right now. People keep saying, well, you got to do something about him. We can't do anything. I think he has a little bit less than 2 years left on his term. Yeah. Now, should he go up for confirmation again, I don't think there's any way he's going to get confirmed. I think he knows that. but people are saying, well, why don't you do something about that? We did. We did with Craig Lang, and we did with this other gentleman, and we've done our work. Yeah. It's just the process that he's in there. He's in there for a while.
Yeah. But Regent Rastetter, it acted within his authority legitimately.
Well, the board did, yes.
Excellent, excellent. And with President Harold, have you met with him? How do you feel about him and the ongoing controversy surrounding his presence at the university?
Well, he has, to his credit, he's made a real good effort to meet with the local delegation. We've met 3 different occasions already, and Senator Bolcom and I met with him individually also. So he's really made an effort to let us know what he's doing and where he's proceeding. One thing we should note, though, you know, we're in Des Moines. We have to work with whoever the governor appoints to the regents. So in the past, I've worked with Mr. Rastetter when he was advocating for more funds for the regents and good things for the regents. I've certainly helped him. Now, on certain things, on the performance-based funding, I didn't work with him on that. I didn't agree with that, and I opposed that. Right. Or other things I've opposed, but I still, you know, am able to work with Mr. Rastetter and Katie Mulholland, and she's the vice president, and others on the regents. We don't have a choice. They're the people who are there. We don't have a choice as to who they came up with as president either. So Mr. Rastetter, like him or not, he's the one who's there, and we have to work with him. So as a legislator, and especially as appropriations chair, I have to work with whoever's there from the universities. I have to work with Mr. Leith at Iowa State and Mr. Root at UNI and Bruce Harold at University of Iowa.
Excellent. Excellent. So you mentioned the performance-based funding.
Right.
This is an issue that was probably this was in the news last year, perceived as being preferential treatment to the universities with more in-state students. Is that correct?
Well, part of it is to try and get more in-state students, to recruit more in-state students, more Iowa students to go to the regions.
Okay.
Now, they could have done that without doing performance-based different ways, but
okay. But a university like UI, which has such a large component of out-of-state and international students, how would that go against the Hawkeyes?
Well, what they did is they were going to cut funding for the University of Iowa. They were going to cut like $47 million over 5 years at the University of Iowa on funding, and then spread that around to Iowa State and UNI. Now, I will say UNI is sort of hanging on by their fingernails. We have just not funded them enough to keep them going. Because they have over, I think, 90% of their students are from Iowa, they don't get any sort of out-of-state tuition. Very little out-of-state tuition funds, so that makes them a little precarious on the funding level. So UNI does need additional funding, and Iowa State probably needs some more because of the additional students they've had there. But I think the performance-based funding model they came up with didn't work. First of all, it wasn't even performance-based; it was enrollment-based, and it really didn't make sense, I don't think, for the state. And it also was sort of pitting the state universities versus the private colleges and the community colleges. Okay. And we were able, and I really do give credit to the House for essentially killing the performance-based. Okay. And our local delegation was very instrumental in that, and I worked on it also, and a number of us from the Senate worked on it also. But we passed, because we did end up with separate bills on education last year. We ended up with separate bills. The Senate Democrats passed one that didn't have performance-based in it. But it did have a theme on sort of how much each university got. And then when it went over to, interesting thing, it went over to the House passed initially without performance-based funding. Their committee, the actual committee, passed it out that way. Well, then apparently Mr. Rastetter became a little irritated and talked to Speaker Paulson, and they had to run an amendment that included performance-based funding in the full appropriations committee in the House and pass that out. Well, then once that was passed, then a number of House Republicans, I think like 17 or so, said they weren't interested in doing that, and then there were 40-some House Democrats also that said that. So seeing the handwriting on the wall, the leadership and the House Republicans then went back and had Representative Dolacek, who's chair of the Education Appropriations Sub, come up with another amendment to go back to essentially what we had done in the Senate. Now, different numbers because their numbers are lower, but essentially based on that situation where we gave some money to UNI, a little bit to Iowa State, and kept the University of Iowa at the same level. Now, that's what we're working towards.
Okay.
So it was really a bipartisan, bicameral work to get rid of performance-based funding. And what I find interesting in that whole situation is what a big thing that was at the beginning of session and all through session and everything. And then once it was done, people turned around and said, what performance-based funding? I mean, like it was never heard of again, and no one paid attention, and it's just incredible how that sort of works. But
it didn't work out, and it didn't become policy.
No, and they haven't recommended performance-based funding, aren't recommending it for this next fiscal year either.
Okay, so you don't expect that issue to come up again?
No. I think they were trying to, I think they're sort of following what we came up with, is that UNI needs funds to keep the doors open, a little bit more to Iowa State for additional students, and then looking for faculty salaries increase at the University of Iowa.
And all of these Regents institutions are excellent universities and on the same team. You know,
they're on the same team, but they're quite different institutions. I mean, that's the one thing that we need to that somewhat was brought out during all the debate is that
the specializations.
But the University of Iowa and Iowa State are both large, research universities, and UNI is a comprehensive Midwestern university. So it's really a different animal. So.
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll move on again to another hot button issue, and that is the Medicaid restructuring here in Iowa. Set to go into effect a week ago, and that didn't happen. Can you explain a little bit about why that didn't happen, and what the next sort of deadline is, and what that means in terms of the savings that this program is supposed to provide to the budget?
Well, the reason it didn't happen is because they had to get approval by the feds, because the Medicaid is a joint federal and state operation. And roughly speaking, maybe, well, it's dropped back a little bit, but from 55 to 60% of it's funded by the feds and the rest by the state. But some of the new, under the Affordable Care Act, some of the new Medicaid people, that's all paid 100%, and that will drop back to 90%. So, but generally speaking, it's probably about 60% or a little bit less that the feds pick up of Medicaid.
Okay.
So they have control of what programs they approve and which ones they don't. Well, because there was a tremendous amount of concern voiced by providers and clients receiving services, and all sorts of institutions, hospitals and others in Iowa, about the way this was proceeding. First of all, it was the shortest time frame they'd ever seen to move it forward. This has been done in other states, but they'd never seen a time frame that short to move it forward and get going on it. And secondly, there was just so much not lined up already, not enough information, not enough people lined up to not only to work as caseworkers or whatever, or not enough groups. There's something like 27,000 providers in the state. And I know a couple of weeks ago when we were on a committee in Des Moines, and they mentioned that they'd only had like 26, or they only had about 50% of those signed up already. So clearly, the feds looked at this, and really, I understand because we did such a good job of getting people to contact the feds and send information and everything. They had the biggest sort of outcry from any state they've ever seen as far as concerns about this situation. So then they sent a team here to Des Moines and looked into what was being done, and then decided, well, you know, you're not ready to move forward. So they moved it back for 2 months. And I don't know what exact triggers they have to meet to proceed in 2 months, but they're going to be looking at how ready they are, you know, how ready DHS is, how ready the providers are ready. Now, we had 4 providers initially, and now essentially, kind of through the court system, they've essentially thrown one out. So there's 3 providers, not providers, but Medicaid privatized operators of the whole situation.
Yeah, sort of administrative businesses that would be stepping in to take over.
Right, sort of 3 of those, and they apparently do not have in place what they need to have in place to get things moving.
And these companies would be doing work that is today done, or until the end of 2015, done by state employees.
State employees and county employees and nonprofits.
All right. So alongside the cost savings, is there any estimate as to how many jobs will be lost?
Oh, that's a good point. Every time you ask any of those companies, what do they call them? I can't remember the exact term they call them. Anyway, they never have any information. They just say, well, we don't know in this state, you know, and I've been 2 or 3 meetings with them, and it's always vague.
And would they be administering these programs from, say, call centers that are out of state, or would they be establishing operations?
Well, they're going to have operations in Iowa, and some of them are going to be around the Des Moines area, and maybe not so much out in the rest of the state, but a couple of them are going to have pledged that they will be out around the state and have centers all around the state, not just in the Des Moines area. But it just varies from operator to operator where they're going to be on that. So, but then the other situation was supposedly, I don't know, you hear a lot of rumors that, you know, you had trained case managers who were working under the system before, and now they're talking about hiring people for $8 an hour. So I hope that's just an ugly rumor and not true, that I hope that they understand that you have to pay people decent wages to get decent people to provide these services that are critical. And the scope of this whole thing is just enormous. You know, it's something like $4.2 billion and over 500,000 Iowans, you know. You know, we're 3.1 million in Iowa, and that's 500,000 Iowans will get services. And think how many families are affected by that. And people with disabilities, elderly, all sorts of people. They're most vulnerable Iowans that are under this program. And you know, apparently the Branstad administration just couldn't get their act together in the really tight time frame they had set up.
Considering the overall price tag on the program, the savings start to look a little small. Yeah,
they are. They do look a little small. That we're paying $600 million or something to save $50 million. That was the proposal that they thought, because they were going to start January 1st, they would have 6 months in the next fiscal year of the program going on. Or this fiscal year of the program going on, and save $51 million.
So what does the delay mean for those projections of the savings?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know when we had our last meeting in Des Moines and DHS was there, they said the $51 million now had been dropped to 49 or something. So it's fairly fluid. So I don't know what it is, and I don't know where they're going to be at on that. I think we'd need to see what happens after a couple months and see where they're at on that. I don't think you could just say, well, we're not going to, you know, achieve that savings, or we're not going to do this or that or whatever.
Yeah.
I think you need to see what the circumstances are at that time and go from there.
And work from actual numbers.
Actual numbers, really, actual data that's out there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, I'm going to segue again and bring up another issue, and that is statewide raise in the minimum wage. Some counties, I know Johnson County has already put a plan in motion and made the first steps to raise that minimum wage. What is the talk about Iowa taking action on minimum wage?
I think it really isn't some counties, it's just Johnson County that's moved forward. I think there was some talk of maybe in Polk and some other places, but Johnson County has actually moved forward to the credit of the Board of Supervisors and a number of other people that have really worked on this and got it moving forward in Johnson County. So, congratulations to them. But we passed the minimum wage last year in the Iowa Senate. I think it passed 27 to 23. And went over to the House, and nothing happened over in the House on it. And now the governor just today came out and said that maybe if we pass the minimum wage, got to his desk, he might sign it. Well, that sounds good, but the House Republicans have been totally opposed to it for a number of years, and I'm not sure how it's going to get out of the House. So maybe the governor could say that, knowing it's never probably going to get out of the Iowa House. So now, if he really wanted the minimum wage, he'd say, "Yeah, I'm really all for the minimum wage. I'll work on the, promote that as one of my items." Now, if he puts it in the budget or in his program proposals, that would be helpful. But we'll see.
I mean, you don't see the governor's staff.
He needs to put his money where his mouth
working
is.
with
Right?
House
Yeah.
Republicans.
No, I haven't heard
on
any of that.
Okay.
So, but it's useful for him to say that if it should somehow get through the House and Senate, he would sign it.
In the previous Senate bill, where would that have put the minimum wage?
$8.75.
Okay.
And then I think it just went up to $8.75 over 2 years. I think.
Okay.
Something like that. We're at $7.25 now.
All right. So that's considerably more modest than the Johnson County
Right.
policy at this point, which is, I understand, challenged in court at this point, or perhaps there's some plan to challenge it in court.
Yeah, I think they had to wait till it actually took effect,
Okay.
so somebody had some standing that actually affected somebody. So I don't know if they're going to challenge it now or what.
All right, and okay, all right. Well, a related issue to the low wages for so many of our workers is hunger relief. What is the status of efforts to increase funding for our local food pantries, and can you describe how that food relief network kind of works statewide? How does the state government relate to those local agencies?
Okay, yeah, hunger is a big issue in the state of Iowa, and one of the things that's sort of out of sight, out of mind, but even in Johnson County, where it's a really fairly affluent county, it's almost 20%. Of 20 or 25% of people are hunger insecure or food insecure in Johnson County. And you've seen a lot of food banks open. I mean, the Crisis Center had their food bank in Iowa City for years, but now we have the Coralville Medical Food Pantry. We have the one in North Liberty that's very successful. We have one in Solon. We have a number of, I have a number of small communities in Cedar County. There's just a major problem there that we need to address. Now, we were able, I think 2 years ago, to get the first appropriations we've ever had for hunger in the state of Iowa. $1 million. And the governor, our initial proposal, and I was working with Senator Peterson on it, Janet Peterson, our initial proposal was for $2 million, just an appropriation. And the governor said that I think the previous year he'd vetoed a proposal like that. This time he said he wanted to pair that with people donating funds towards this. We also have a tax credit. There's a tax credit in there if people donate produce and that sort of thing. That's in there also. Okay. So the tax credit was in there, and then the food banks would get $1 million if they found $1 million in donations. Okay. So that was the trigger. It's a match up to $1 million, okay. And they did match that. And then last year we were going to go back, because there's still the need out there, and it's probably a growing need. We're going to go back and try and get $1 million again, and they decided not to because previously they just sort of said, well, that was going to be kind of a one-time thing, but it really isn't a one-time thing. So now I'm working with the food banks of Iowa to try and come up with some sort of proposal again this year to try, because the need is clearly out there, and figure out some way how to fund this. So there's the food banks of Iowa, and they have, I think, 8 or 9 different large food banks around the state. The one in this area is run by HACAP out in Cedar Rapids. It's up in Hiawatha.
All right.
Out of Lynn County, it's up in Hiawatha. And they serve all the food pantries, like the Crisis Center one and the Coralville Ecumenical one here, and that sort of thing. And they distribute the food through there.
Okay.
So we're trying to see what we can do on that, and maybe see if we might want to use some tax credits or whatever. We're trying to look at what they've done in other states and try and come up with some way to deal with that, because it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem, and I don't think we can really ignore this. I mean, we need to deal with it.
So if funding is approved with a similar kind of matching scheme in this session, would funds provided by municipalities, such as the contribution of the city of Coralville to the Coralville Ecumenical Food Pantry, is there a way to include that kind of funding as part of the match?
That's a good point. I don't know. I assume what they figured before was just a match to the big food banks around the state, but that's something we ought to look at and see how they figure that. I don't know exactly how that works. I think it was, the governor did put together some sort of I think it's called some sort of blue ribbon committee or something that was supposed to help raise money, red, white, and blue, something to raise money towards this. And they did. I think they did, hit their $1 million. But I think that was just that with the $1 million appropriation was going to go to the main food banks, and then they would just distribute it out to the local ones. So
there's a hierarchy of these organizations around the state.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for stopping by and helping us educate the residents of Coralville, help us understand these issues in a little more depth. And when people want to contact you, what is the best way to get in touch with you and let you know how people feel about issues, if they have ideas or concerns?
Sure. Essentially, any way they want to do it. I'm not really big on Twitter, I have to say that. So, but any kind of email or they can call, or they can go back to the old style letter writing or whatever. Or they can come to Des Moines. We get an enormous amount of people from Johnson County and Cedar County that do come to Des Moines.
Yes,
for various things. Yeah, so that's good. But if you do come to Des Moines and want to catch me, it would be good to let me know in advance, though, because we're running around various meetings on appropriations or whatever.
So we'll make sure that we have your email and your legislative phone number on screen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, thank you. And hopefully this session will be more. It's going to be a tough session, and I always try and explain, truthfully what I think is going to happen in this session. I hope it won't be as tough as we're laying it out, but.
I really appreciate your focus on being collegial, even in the face of conflict. You're collegial and professional and productive. I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate that, and part of it's appropriations. We have to get the budget done, so we have to work with with the House Republicans or whoever it might be,
you just kind of
to get it done, and the governor's office,
and get it done,
and whatever. So we have to sit down and get that done.
Okay. All right. Well. We'll be right back in just a moment here on CoralVision with Representative Dave Jacoby, and we'll find out what he thinks about how things will go in this upcoming session. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to CoralVision's Legislative Preview Show. I'm your host, Eric Dickerson. We're now here with Representative Dave Jacoby, and welcome, Dave. Thank you for coming to City Hall today and helping us educate Coralville residents about the nuts and bolts of legislative work that you do. Can you tell me, how long have you been serving in the Iowa House of Representatives, and what was your political career like before that?
Well, I've been serving in the Iowa House since 2004, after a special election in 2003, and before that I probably served for 2 terms on the Coralville City Council.
Okay, so you have a quite deep experience in public service as an elected official here. So at this point in your legislative career, What are your committee assignments like and the responsibilities that come from that as the session unfolds?
Well, as we approach the 2016 session next week, I do serve on the House Democratic Leadership Team. I'm the ranking member, the top Democrat on the Ways and Means Committee, which deals with all tax and fee issues. And then I also serve on the Commerce Committee, anything having to do with business or any taxes related to businesses or policies that help promote business in Iowa, and on the Transportation Committee. I work directly with the DOT on not only the financings of our roads and bridges, but also what the long-term vision is, what the matrix for transportation looks like in the state of Iowa.
Okay. So as a member of the House Democratic Leadership Team, you are in the opposition in the House. So your role is to play foil to the House Republican leadership. What does that mean for you in terms of how the budget process plays out across the next 6 to 8 weeks?
Well, there is a theory that the minority party is the loyal opposition. I think going into the 2016 session, we're actually working together from the get-go in terms of the budget and education and other top issues that we're going to deal with. But I think right now where the point of differential is that we don't agree what that bottom line number is. Okay. In other words, the Revenue Estimating Conference came back with an increase in our state revenues of $124 million, but that increase is less than what was projected the Revenue Estimating Conference 6 months before. So it is an increase over the previous year, but the increase is not as much as they predicted it would be for the 2017 budget.
Okay. Does that give the House Republicans greater leverage in their argument about where that bottom line should fall?
Well, I think what we have is a discussion on how much money should be invested in the state of Iowa and how much should be saved. In essence, a rainy day fund. Right now, we have over $500 million in the rainy day fund. We have $300 million in a taxpayer trust fund, and we have about $248 million in what I call kind of a waiting to see what happens fund in terms of Medicaid and other built-ins for the state of Iowa, costs that may not be projected. So all in all, we have about $1 billion in reserve on top of that $7 billion budget. So financially, we're sitting pretty well. The discussion is going to be how best to invest it. Do we invest it in students in schools, or do we invest it in more business tax remediation or forgiving more taxes for businesses, or there's just that usually is what it boils down to, is do we promote business or do we promote education? And I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think they go together.
Right. You can't have a strong business community, you can't have strong business growth without a very skillful, educated population, right?
Yes, they certainly need that for the workforce, and that's what we're hearing from businesses, is we need our young people and people my age too. We keep hearing about the brain drain, and it's very important we keep as many of our young skilled workers here, but we also have some of us older workers who, as far as I know, still have a brain too, and we can be trained and learn new skills. I think what we have to do is invest in the education and training for our K-12 students and our post-secondary students too, to make the stepping stone into the business world a little easier and to give businesses a great workforce pool to choose from.
Yeah, it makes Iowa a more attractive option.
It does.
So tell me about K through 12 funding and how that works. And what happened last year? What do you expect for this year?
Well, I think from everything I hear, this year will be a much better year than it was last year in terms of funding our public K-12 schools. The schools annually need at least 3% allowable growth or supplemental aid. And what that is just simply the amount the state invests per pupil in the state of Iowa. And today that amount is about $6,200, a little over $6,200 per student. And that is the main revenue for all of our public schools. And last year it was very disappointing that even after we worked out a compromise agreement with House Republicans and we sent that bill to the Senate and then to the governor's office, and then 2 months after we adjourned, the governor vetoed that compromise. And that again was a compromise between Republicans and Democrats. And we put together the pieces for allowable growth, teacher quality, teacher leadership, and some money for busing and transportation needs for both rural and urban areas. And we worked overtime. The legislators were off the payroll, if you will, but we're always happy to work on something as important as education. But it was very disappointing, number one, that the governor vetoed the compromise, and quite frankly, the length of time it took him to veto the bill. In other words, he waited to the last possible moment, which means school administrators had no time to plan, because when he vetoed the bill late in July, we were only weeks away from the next school year starting. So school administrators had to work very hard to determine what teachers in what classroom, how many students were in each classroom, and that's a critical performance measure we want to keep an eye on, the number of students per classroom, but also the fact that it's year to year. And we offered, let's do a school budget for 2 years out instead of 1 year at a time, and the governor refused to consider that too.
Well, if the bill containing allowable growth was vetoed, how was that policy decided in the end for the current school year?
Well, what happened was it had an allowable growth piece, the supplemental aid, and then other line items meant to increase the funding mechanisms for school, like $55 million that schools could use for infrastructure, and infrastructure can include computers or whatever the technology needs were for the individual school districts. And it was pieced together in a way such that we were using money that was readily available and being responsible, not to put it in years out that we might not be able to afford it, but for the next year as a stopgap, and that we could come together early this year. Normally, every year, the school funding for the following year is supposed to be decided by the end of January.
Okay.
And this compromise that we came to last session was reached in the middle of June. So it was already 4 to 5 months behind the time. So the governor's veto 6 weeks later made it incrementally worse.
Okay, so where did that allowable growth land last year? It was somewhere in the 1 to 2% range, is that right?
The straight up allowable growth, the per student amount was under 2%.
Okay.
But when you put the pieces together of the K-12 puzzle, the total package came to just a little over 2%.
Okay.
So it was still not where the public schools need to be. It was an improvement over the previous year, but after the governor vetoed it, it left many schools. There's a number of schools that did give out pink slips, rearranged classrooms, and to me personally, the most important thing, it increased class sizes.
Yeah. So a 3% allowable growth increase is basically supports a status quo budget at the schools. Is that a correct assessment?
That's a fair assumption that 3% puts you barely where you need to be just on a growth perspective. And each school district has different challenges. Locally, our schools see an increase every year of the number of students. Many schools in Iowa are seeing a reduction in the number of students. So their struggles are different than ours. While we have a number of students in temporary buildings or in classrooms that are too large, smaller schools are trying to hold on to one grade level because of the number of students, and some of their classes are, quite frankly, too small to be financially feasible. So we're trying to in the legislature, you try to balance both. How do you keep the rural schools and urban schools performing at the top levels? And we also propose a number of items to keep school improvement on that upward trajectory. And that's for, STEM and STEAM opportunities for all our students, professional development for our teachers, and also, again, if we were to finally fund our schools at more than 1 year at a time, our school administrators could focus on the needs of the students instead of worrying about where am I going to place teachers in 6 weeks or in 2 months. Then every year, two of the superintendents told me they spend 1/3 of their time on worrying about funding and how to move staff around. So if we were to fund in out years, that would remove that barrier that they have to actually getting into the classroom and seeing what teachers are doing.
So last year, the governor projected that he would support somewhere around 2.4% allowable growth in this year. Do you feel like he'll follow through on that, and how do the revenue projections play into that discussion?
Well, the revenue projections in our fiscal notes show that we can afford to invest $265 million more in our K-12 education, and that would be around a 3.1% allowable growth increase.
Okay.
The governor has initially proposed, and we will see it next week, 2.45, and there is a distrust with the governor right now. House members, both Democrats and Republicans, who work together on the compromise and are talking right now. We're talking right now what we can get done this year. There's a distrust from both House Republicans and House Democrats on what the governor will really follow through with. So I think what we're going to do is two things. Number one, the House members are going to sit down and look at some numbers that are realistic, and then we're going to sit down with the governor's office and say, this is what we tentatively plan to push through both caucuses. Will you support it? And quite frankly, I'm going to want to hear that he publicly supports it. Not, behind the scenes, back, smoky room, oh yeah, we'll do it. No, I want to know, are you going to do it and support us in this compromise plan that we're working on?
Okay, so it sounds like there are a lot of talks and a lot of bringing light into the process, because this process isn't entirely outlined in the Constitution or in the schedule or the calendar of the session. This is a lot of negotiation between concerned parties and factions, right?
That's true. And as far as I'm concerned, all these negotiations can take place in public. They can take place in the rotunda with announced meetings. It's not on the topic we're discussing, but one of my frustrations in Des Moines is we tend to tell local governments how to be open.
Yeah.
And then we go back and have closed meetings. It's a little ironic to me that we're proposing or mandating that at the city and county levels and school board levels, you have to have all open meetings. And I think we at the state level have to follow the same policy that we transpose on our local governments.
That's a very good point, because I know city councilors can't get together for lunch without taking notes and publishing notes as though it were a scheduled work session, or they have to publish an agenda, all that sort of business that keeps things on the up and up. But the state doesn't follow those requirements.
And that's good policy for our city government. We do not follow the same thing. In fact, and this is kind of the inside the walls, but anyone can come visit at any time, and I love it when local people come and visit and spend the day with me at the Capitol. And I'm always open to that. Just let me know that you're coming. Is that we have the caucus system where both political parties meet in private to decide how they're going to determine policy. And I like an open discussion where everyone can hear and everyone can have input too on that topic. And that's one thing I keep pushing for, and we're working on. And in fact, when the open meetings law came through 3 or 4 years ago, I was one of 2 people who voted no. And I didn't vote no because I didn't promote open meetings. I voted no because we weren't practicing what we preach.
Ah, okay.
And it was interesting, the 2 no votes were one Democrat, myself, and one Republican woman from Altoona, Iowa. But we need to keep working on open meetings in Des Moines. And I think it's important, anything we discuss today, because the best ideas come from people in our district.
Absolutely.
And you can't get any ideas if people don't know what's going on.
Right, right. Okay. Well, let's move on to a really good idea that you had. Perhaps that came from a citizen too. I don't know where this idea came from, but we talked about with Senator Dvorsky the process for nominating and appointing and approving the State Board of Regents. Okay. Can you give me a little perspective on how that works and how we might be able to improve that process and what you've done to try to suggest improvements?
Well, I did a little research on some other states. Colorado is one of them, on their Board of Regents, their ruling body for their public colleges, and a number of states, as Colorado, elects their regents. Or elects their trustees. And I have found or seen that it seems that takes a level of the politics out of it. Now, in the last 2 administrations, both Democrat and Republican, the Board of Regents has become far too polarizing and far too political. And I think we've seen that especially in the last 2 years with our current Board of Regents and the way they've treated our University of Iowa. And is there discrimination there? You bet there is. There's a number of board members that don't hold the University of Iowa in the esteem that it should be held. But basically, my proposal is that we elect by region our regents or trustees to perform their duties for oversight for our regent schools.
Okay. So that would keep those regents from being identified with the governor who appointed them.
That means who they would report to is the people in Iowa and the people in their district.
Excellent.
And by having them in regions, that means every corner of the state would be covered. Okay. In other words, if there's not, currently as you appoint regents, you could have a whole quadrant of the state not represented. So I think we should have it set up where each quadrant is represented and with at-large seats too.
Okay, all right. So while we're on the topic of the regents, have you had a chance to meet with the new president, President Harold, and how do you see that going forward in terms of the relationship between our local delegation, the University of Iowa, and the new president?
Well, I've met with the new president 3, maybe 4 times, Bruce, and he likes to be called Bruce. And actually, I'm impressed with him. Okay. And I think what we've done and what we have to look at, or keep looking at, is we've flipped the model. The model has always been that we've hired an academic, and hopefully that academic would learn or pick up on the business sense, the business side of running the university. The model's been flipped. We have a business person who has to learn much about the academic side of a university.
Okay.
It's caused some uneasy stomachs on campus and with a lot of us who work with the university, both inside and outside. But I think, number one, we need to give Bruce a chance. And why that is because he is the president of the University of Iowa. And anything that happens at the University of Iowa reflects on all of us.
Yeah.
So we are tied at the hip with Bruce. And so I think it's in the best interest for all of us to make the best situation, the best outcome that it can be. Right. My concerns remain the same, that I think Bruce is capable of working and running the University of Iowa. I hope that the regents or certain regent members don't have undue influence and try to run it through him. But again, I've met him 3 or 4 times, and I'm impressed with him. And I think we're ready to move ahead.
All right. Well, speaking of moving ahead, Iowa Sports has been on a roll of sorts, but I know you're a wrestling fan. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on at UI Wrestling for the forthcoming year? I know this is not legislative business. I'm sorry about this. And also, I heard from Josh Schamberger from the CVB that we may be hosting Olympic trials again.
Olympic
here.
trials again. And the way it sounds is it's a very good possibility that we'll host the Olympic trials again, which is a hoot. And anyone, if you're interested in wrestling or not, you have to go witness the trials themselves or just go downtown. Because it's kind of fun to see the number of people who may not have ears from their wrestling careers. But the Iowa wrestling team is doing well this year. The wrestling match on the gridiron. The grappling on the gridiron was just something to behold with 40 or more thousand people. The weather was perfect. We got to whoop on Oklahoma State, which is always a good thing, whether it's indoors or out. But and I think our wrestling team has a real shot at national championship this year.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, that was a great aside, and I'll bring it right.
I always
right
like
back.
to talk about wrestling.
I know it's one of your favorite things. It's one of your favorite things. So we're going to bring it back to sort of serious business, and let's talk about the controversy over water quality. I was at a forum yesterday where you were talking about the conflict between the municipalities and the rural areas over responsibility for water quality and who pays for those improvements. What are the policies that are being proposed, and how would they sort of differentially affect municipalities like Coralville as opposed to, say, rural areas upriver in the Iowa River Valley?
Well, the current proposal, we have two things. Of course, the lawsuit in Des Moines from the Des Moines Water Works, who's suing a couple of counties upstream. And it is about water quality. The water quality in Iowa stinks right now. And we really need to make some conscious efforts to clean up the water, not only because I like to fish, and I kind of like to eat the fish that I catch too. And I want waterways that are clean for my daughters and family members and all of us to enjoy. But it's also about who pays for it. And that's what the lawsuit is about. It's not about is water quality something we should address. It's about who pays for it, urban or rural. And what we're seeing is the proposal by the governor, which basically says in about 20 years out, instead of using the SAVE tax money for school infrastructure, he's proposing that we split that money and use it for water quality. Well, that hurts our local governments because that takes money out of their sales tax revenues, but it's also money that the schools plan for their infrastructure. It also, in my opinion, shifts the burden for water quality on our urban areas while our rural areas don't have the same investment. And I think our rural areas need to have a bigger investment in cleaning up our rivers and tributaries. So it's going to be a little bit of an arm wrestling match with those two factors, the lawsuit and water quality. Everyone accepts the fact we need to improve it, but no one wants to pay for it. And that's where we're sitting now, is how do we pay for that?
City budgets are really tight, and for instance, right here in Coralville, we're making extra efforts to make significant improvements in how we manage, for instance, construction, post-construction, and we're also really investing in stormwater infrastructure, infiltration structures and that sort of giant rain gardens and such that we see over on Coral Ridge Avenue and that kind of thing, a really landmark project with a research component. But are there any proposals afoot to help those farmers upstream manage their nutrients better? That's really the key pollutant we're talking about, right?
Us city folk have a stake in it too.
Absolutely.
And that's, simply how many times we fertilize our yard, during the summer, spring and fall. But also little things like if you fertilize your yard, sweep your sidewalks and your driveway.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the fertilizer runoff isn't coming from the yard itself or the turf, it's coming from all those
Yeah.
specks on the driveway that wash
Yeah.
into our system. But yeah, agriculture does cover many more acres, and I think it has to be a partnership. We had over $17 million for voluntary water quality cleanup in the budget last year, and the governor vetoed that too. So his recent proposals seem like, I don't know, guilt feelings. It's kind of like if you felt like maybe I was a little too harsh on my teenager yesterday, and so today I'm going to give her $6 to go to Steak and Shake and have lunch, where normally you wouldn't do that, kind of make it up. I think instead of making up something for a wrong that he may have made, is we have to look at it from a holistic point of how much money each year we're going to invest in water quality and cleaning up our tributaries. But also the core argument is it a mandatory program or is it a volunteer program?
Right.
And we're struggling right now to see the effects or the performance measures of the volunteer program.
Okay.
And so this may be for the first session we see something solid, whether it's positive or negative, how the volunteer nutrient strategy has been working or not working.
Okay, so we'll look at a buy-in and also the actual results in the stream. Is there any sense that the shift in corn prices will have any effect on buy-in on conservation programs like buffer strips, with the potential value of that buffer strip land sort of lower relative to the potential value of having that in conservation? Does that figure into the discussion?
Well, it's a very good question, because the price of corn is half of what it was, a year and a half ago per bushel. And does that encourage farm families to set aside more land with the set-aside program, or do we keep tilling as much land as we have been in the previous 5 years because of the prices? I don't know, and it's hard to predict. The only thing we can do is keep encouraging the set-aside, the buffer strips, and make sure that those financial incentives are there for agriculture too. I know for myself, I like to keep an eye on, which is not a scientific way of, but the pheasant population.
Okay.
And that's what I ask the DNR for every year. What's the pheasant population and where are they?
Yeah.
Because once you pick the corn, once you harvest, that's a little less spot for them to take home in. And is there enough room? Is there
That's their
20 yards
habitat.
habitat? Where are we sitting for them to reproduce or live through a rough winter? And we'll have to see. Again, we're going to look at some of those numbers, I believe, in March this year, that Chuck Gipp from the DNR, Department of Natural Resources, and Chuck Gipp is a great guy to work with, and I think he has the best intentions here. In fact, as the former majority leader in the House, I've seen him frustrated himself with the governor's office, saying, this is our plan for nutrient strategy, for nutrient reduction strategy, and you're not helping me much.
And he's not someone who doesn't care about the environment, quite the contrary.
Oh, he is. He's very invested.
Yeah. Okay. All right. A transition here. The Iowa River passes right under I-80 here in Coralville. So I know that there are some issues afoot, some discussion about safety on I-80. So how is this? What is the backstory here? And what are the proposals? And who makes these determinations about how to manage interstate highways?
Well, the Department of Transportation, the DOT, is in charge of the highway itself.
Okay.
But local entities, the cities and counties, can make proposals to the DOT for safety. From what I've heard from a number of people in Johnson County. One of them is Larry, the neighbor up the street in Coralville, who's very concerned because of the number of accidents on I-80 between exit 240 and exit 246, and a number of those accidents have been fatal, and a number of the accidents number of accidents with critical injuries for those that survive, and a number of them are from our 18-wheelers, our trucking industry. And what we're looking at are what are the options. Even since we added that lane, the trucking accidents and other vehicle accidents have increased. So I'm working with the DOT, and we're working with our friends and neighbors who bring it up, saying, Dave, it's so scary. Or my son or daughter has to take the interstate to get to a certain part of Iowa City or over to City High, or just to get to the other side to shop. And they're worried. They say, we can't have our children on I-80 because of the ramps. So we're looking at two things. Is there a way through traffic control, and that would be reducing speeds through that, for that length from 240 to 246, but also an input from our local law enforcement.
Okay.
What does that mean? And one officer said, it's a great idea when you think about it, but I'm worried about the accidents as people slow down suddenly. Is it going to be an increase in rear end accidents, or people not paying attention? And that's a valid question. So we're going to do some traffic studies to see what could be done, because again, the concerns I hear, and this is from local people, are the accidents with trucks and other vehicles, but also the noise. The noise from the interstate.
Okay, so like in the Northridge neighborhood.
Northridge neighborhood, I can hear it. Well, on my back deck, some nights you can't hear it very much at all, and other nights it's like they're going right underneath your deck there. But I'm fine with the noise. Doesn't bug me. It's part of where I live, and where my wife grew up, next to Highway 20 in Rockwell City. But it's concerning the people south of the interstate.
Okay.
That since the addition of a third lane, it seems like there's also additional noise to them over there. So, and the DOT is very concerned, and we've talked about buffer zones and how to make that quieter, but most importantly, safer.
Yeah, we definitely want to minimize the loss of life and limb there. Okay, and you already answered my question, which was, how does law enforcement feel about that? But that's a really valid concern on their part, because people are going 75 or 80 miles an hour with their cruise control on. People passing through, and the truckers, so they have to be very alert and alerted with signage when the speed limit changes.
Interstate 80, because I drive it often to go to Des Moines, is an anomaly in and of itself. It's I can set my cruise control safely at 70, maybe 71 on the interstate, and sometimes it feels like I am driving 20 miles an hour when people are flying past you.
Right.
And there's those safety concerns. That it's not one of our lists, but we'll also talk with the DOT again on texting and driving and some of those high-profile issues that encourage and discourage safety on the interstate.
Now, are those issues for legislation, or is that something where you are using your influence as an elected official to help inform the professional staff?
Well, and both. Education is key from the DOT and all of us when we talk to anyone at any level about the dangers of texting and driving. And legislatively, we're looking at a way to improve the very light law that we did pass a number of years ago, that law enforcement has told us it's a great idea, but it doesn't give us any enforcement capabilities.
Okay, regarding texting.
Regarding texting and driving, and as a parent who has driven to West High and on Mormon Trek or on Melrose, and to look over to your side and see a student with his or her head down, and I mean totally down, looking at the phone on their lap.
At 35 miles an hour.
At 35, 45, or 40 miles an hour, whatever speed they're going, it sends a shiver up your spine, knowing that something could happen in a split second.
Yeah, and that generation of people are, that's the future. That's our future. So, okay, I'm sorry about the abrupt segues, but I'm gonna bring this back to, well, I guess it's not so abrupt, auto insurance. there are some issues with the way that our auto insurance requirements are structured, and we were talking a little bit earlier about some ideas that you have to make that more equitable for people who are involved in accidents that are of no fault of their own.
Well, I heard from a number of our Coralville residents who had been involved in accidents, and the accidents, as determined by the police and themselves and the insurance companies, were not their fault. And the damage done to their vehicles were over the minimum liability amount that we require on those vehicles. And so what has happened is, if you happen to have a vehicle that's valued at $20,000, but since the limit or that you must have is 15, that when the insurance company settles, they'll say, okay, our client was in the wrong, we'll pay you $15,000. That gap of $5,000 actually comes from your insurance company and goes against your actuarial science, which means your premiums could go up even for an accident that you didn't cause.
Right.
So I think what we need to do, because this law was set up, as I understand, in 1979, and the cost or average price of vehicles is considerably more than that now.
Absolutely.
So I think we need to look at that, those limits, that we require at least enough that if I'm in the wrong, and that's why I have insurance. An accident is just that, an accident. But if I was in the wrong, then my insurance company or I'm responsible to pay for the totality of that other person's loss.
Okay.
And right now that's not the case. And so you have people who, through no cause of their own, are seeing increases in their premiums because their vehicle needed to be covered.
Okay, so the policy you're suggesting is to increase the maximum liability
For collision.
rather than limit another insurer's ability to count an amount beyond that liability against the faultless driver.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
And again, we know accidents happen, but I think that's a cleaner way to do it. That if fault is determined in an accident, many times it is not, but most of the times it is, that in fault we require auto insurance in Iowa, then that person and that provider, insurance provider, should cover the totality of circumstances for the other vehicle and or person.
So perhaps removing that limit altogether and just saying the totality of damages to the vehicle.
Well, in the world of insurance, and I'm no expert, but they do have to have limits or floors and ceilings, and that's how they work it out with their actuarial scientists. So I think what we need to do is look at that limit and see what is an average car in Iowa's replacement cost right now.
Okay.
And it certainly is more than what the required collision amount is.
Okay, yeah.
Not so much in the Jacoby household, where our vehicles may not be at the top end by any means.
Yeah, but we have to make room for the folks who have
that have the very nice vehicles that I hope to own one of these days.
Yeah, well, one day I'd like to have one myself. But and now comes the difficult segue, coming back to tax reform and property tax. I know these are separate issues, but let's start off with the current suggestions or proposals that are out there to amend the income tax regulations, the income tax scheme here in Iowa.
Well, I've always been a proponent of simplifying our tax system.
Okay.
And there's a proposal right now, an alternative tax proposal that would let you use either the flat tax formula or the current formula. I think if we're really going to show some guts, then let's look at a pure, flat, simple tax for everyone and make sure it's fair for everyone in each income category. The one that's proposed right now I do not support because it gives the biggest tax relief to a household over $750,000 and much less to an average household of $100,000 or $150,000.
So it's like the federal minimum alternative.
It's similar to,
Okay.
but it's also an alternative that says you can file either way.
Yeah.
And I think what it would actually do is add 60 to 70 pages to our Iowa tax code.
Okay.
And that doesn't simplify the tax code. If we're going to simplify it, if we're truly going to go to a postcard income tax system, let's go to the postcard system where it's fair to everyone.
And if we did do that, where would a flat tax fall in terms of meeting our revenue requirements and being fair across the range of incomes? Do you have any feeling about where a flat tax would be?
Well, and I think I'd almost reverse that. What's fair, and then let's see what that does to our state revenues.
Okay.
In other words, let's start from a fair tax for everyone. And if people are a household of 4 making under $25,000, then the earned income tax credit, they may not have a state liability. But looking at which tier you want to set, that's the toughest part in the legislature, is determining which tier is at what level to pay the taxation rate. A true flat tax says it's 9% across the board, no matter what level you are.
Right.
And I think there's some validity to that. The problem is when you work it backwards, would it decimate the state budget? Or does it mean that if you have a flat tax, my tax liability is less, but then the schools will need for money to be made up through property taxes or sales taxes or another tax levy.
Right.
So if you're just shifting it, it's not relief and it's not fair.
Right. Right. So I guess what you're proposing is a simplified, progressive, tiered tax rather than a true flat tax, which would probably be onerous for lower and middle income households if we were to just make the goal replacing our current revenue stream with a flat tax.
Exactly. And one of the caveats to any kind of tax reform is you have your tax credit system. And that's another thing that we would have to mitigate. And that's the tax credits, first-time home buyers, veterans tax credits.
Lots of people benefit.
There's a lot of people that benefit from those tax credits. How do we mitigate that system? How do you initiate it? How do you keep it in place? And then suddenly you don't have your flat tax or your consistent progressive tax reform. What you have is a system that's more complicated. Will I get those tax credits?
We have the same kind of Swiss cheese.
That's a good analogy there. You plug one hole and you're sitting there in the dam, and I only have 2 thumbs.
It's a different complexity that would be proposed. Do you expect that to come out of committee? And
I think a flat tax and a simplified tax and an alternative tax, all 3 different methods, will probably come out in some form out of the Ways and Means Committee this year.
Okay.
I'm confident we'll have subcommittees and committees. Whether it reaches the floor or not, usually between the committee and the floor is when we have what we call a fiscal note. And the fiscal note will determine how much that will cost in state revenues, but also when the question is asked how it affects local governments. Because right now the state has a built-in cost of over $300 million a year to backfill the commercial property tax legislation that was passed 2 years back. And that's $300 million a year that the cities and counties are counting on. And I don't know how sustainable that's going to be over the next 8 years, but it is a commitment that was made, a commitment that we made to backfill cities.
Is that a promise or is that a statutory?
Well, it's statutory in the fact that there's a line item, but any time that you have trouble with your revenue streams, then each line item, because education is a line item too. It's a little frustrating that we can make a promise for 10 years to backfill the commercial property tax, but we seem unable to make that same promise to our education system, whether it's K-12 or our regents or community colleges. So that's one thing over the years I've learned is that you see some things that just aren't fair, and then every year I ask a little louder voice, why? If we can make that commitment for a line item at this amount for our commercial property tax rollback or backfill, why can't we do that for education? But the cities are hurt this year because of the commercial property tax go into residential rates for apartments and condos.
Okay.
So it really hurts. It's a budget hit for counties, or for Johnson County and Coralville and Iowa City, and there is no backfill for that.
Oh.
So the cities will be left on their own to either make cuts or somehow make do with that budgetary difference.
Would you take a moment to review that timeline of when that property tax reform came into effect and the schedule that is proposed or was proposed for when the rollback for commercial property tax comes into line with the rollback for residential, and the implications of that for Coralville and other municipalities?
Well, for a number of years, commercial used to pay 100% evaluation, and residential would pay anywhere from 48 to 61% of valuation, and that's called rollback. And the rollback for homeowners is based simply on the tie between their homeowner property values and agriculture.
Okay, so the tax levy is a percentage of the value of the tax levy is a percentage of the rollback percentage on the property.
Correct. So a home valued at $100,000 generally would, if it's valued at $100,000, your tax rate would be based on about 60% of that value.
Okay.
But no one, because of the commercial property tax bill, has seen a reduction in their homeowners.
No.
Everyone, all residential, all homeowners, property tax liability has gone up.
Okay.
And part of the selling point for the commercial property tax is it will bring everyone's property taxes down. And what has happened is all of us as homeowners are picking up the tax liability. In fact, homeowners are paying more. And one of the things, when we pay back the commercial property tax relief, which is 5% per year reduction for commercial property tax owners, is that payback to the cities, or the backfill comes out of our income tax.
Okay.
So
That's the connection
and
there.
Iowa's tax system is very mired. It's complicated and interwoven, but 60% of our state revenues comes from personal income tax. So 60% of that $300 million that we use to backfill for the commercial property tax relief comes from all of us. So we're paying for it. We're paying for it through our income tax, and then in any gaps local government has comes through the property taxes. So the commercial property tax that I worked on for 7 years, the bill that was passed, quite frankly, is the worst tax bill I've ever seen in my life. But it was passed, and now it's my job to make sure it works.
Okay, so what are the implications for folks like Mayor Lundell and Administrator Hayworth when they proposed their budgets? The rollback of commercial property tax means they lose a big chunk of revenue that they've sort of planned for over the long term. And the original promise was to backfill that amount.
Correct.
But then there is a change of regulations in terms of whether apartment complexes or condos are considered commercial or residential. What was that change?
The apartments are actually a separate piece.
Okay.
So what happened is with the commercial property tax reduction, every year the cities and counties estimate what that cost is, and the Department of Revenue says, yes, that's what it is, and then we backfill that amount from our income tax and sales tax, the top two revenue streams for the state. The property tax reduction for apartments, which originally, if you had more than 4 units, it was considered a commercial unit and taxed at a higher rate than your residential. Well, they're moving it back to a residential rate, but the cities and counties do not get a backfill for that reduction. So in college towns specifically, or towns with considerable rental properties, there will be a reduction for that cost of the business owner or building owner, but there will not be a backfill to the local governments.
Okay, so how do they make up that
That's the question that's hanging
Yeah.
there right
Yeah.
now. How do cities and counties make it up? You take the loss and maybe make some program or staff cuts,
Mm-hmm.
or you hope that your business growth or the growth of your city outpaces the
Property
loss
valuation.
of that
Okay.
of that income for the cities.
Okay, and that's problematic in itself, just because of the issue you mentioned earlier about seniors and they're struggling to afford property taxes as properties appreciate in value. That creates a great challenge, and also the cost. When you build out for a city, when you build out a new neighborhood, there are considerable costs and monies borrowed in order to create streets and sewage infrastructure and those sorts of things. I know you're familiar with those issues from
I am.
being on the council. So, anyway.
Well, and the challenge is there for especially people who may be on fixed incomes.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm looking to do through one of the bills I'm proposing, and this actually came from a neighbor,
Mm-hmm.
and also came from, I can't mention his name, but he might be a golf coach at West High, who said that when people are living on fixed incomes, when the property taxes go up, and we do want our valuation for properties to go up, that's a good thing. But when you're on a fixed income, can you afford that increase in the property taxes? And somehow for us to say, let's freeze that property tax rate for our retired, for our seniors, for our retired people living in the homes, because we want them to stay there as long as they can. And we want them to stay in Coralville and Iowa City as long as they can. That we freeze that property tax rate for them after retirement, and then the state picks up the difference, and it only changes once they leave their home.
Okay.
And I've heard from a handful of people that is on their fixed incomes a challenge if it goes up in the following year. And the property tax increases have actually gone up mainly because of valuation. The cities and counties have been real responsible in not raising the rate.
Yes.
And I think, if I remember correctly, the city of Coralville hasn't raised a property tax rate in a very long time.
Our levy's been flat for a number of years. It's a point of pride. I think it's a point of pride
is.
for our finance director and for Administrator Hayworth that we're doing our best to not put that burden onto the homeowners.
Onto the homeowners, yeah.
Right.
Yep, and Tony and Kelly do a great job here with that.
So you've heard from particular constituents about that struggle. What does that look like for people who? Can you tell us a little more about the particulars of those situations?
Well, without going into personal history with a couple and another gentleman that I've sat down and talked to, they've outlined what it looks like on their fixed budget and where they sit in terms of actually both homes are paid off, but with their Social Security, a modest pension plan, and family obligations where they're sitting, and it is a concern for them.
Okay.
Some people will say, well, it's not that big a deal. Well, it is a big deal when your income is solidly fixed.
Yeah.
And when we see at a national level, there's no cost of living increases for the Social Security set up for the next year or two. And some of the pension plans that may be in trouble, people are a little worried right now where they're sitting, even with their fixed income. So I think, and these are people who have been residents for decades, and they've been proud community members, invested in the community, and I think we should do what we can to keep them here.
Well, I'm glad that folks in this community have someone like you and a senator like Senator Dvorsky out there trying to translate between what is real in real life here and what goes on at the state government, and trying to make sure that that people can live with the government that they have. But I want to thank you for coming in and doing this every year and helping us with this educational effort. We want to help residents understand how this works, how the state government and the legislative process works. How would you how do you prefer to get input from residents? If someone has a concern or an idea that they want to share with you, what is the best way to contact you?
Well, the best way is by email.
Okay.
And that could be an email to our legislative address or even my AOL address.
Okay.
But emails work great. If it's something that needs to be explained, it's hard to explain in an email. Phone calls are always welcome.
right.
And of course, as I say every year, I love it when people come to visit
Yeah.
at the State House.
Yeah.
It helps to have notice a day or two before you come to visit, just so I make sure that I can allocate time, get you a name badge, and even take you to some committee meetings.
Yeah.
But again, correspondence by email, snail mail works too. Any way to communicate and phone, any way to communicate that issue is greatly appreciated.
Excellent.
And then I like to make sure that we get back to someone within 48 hours.
Yeah.
Both to let them know I've seen the issue and their correspondence, but also to clarify any issues with it. And so any way you can contact me or live on North Ridge Drive. A lot of neighbors pull in the driveway. I actually had someone do that when I was trying to break the ice on my driveway a couple days ago. Pulled up, and his issue was seat belts on school buses.
That's a great idea.
I think it's a fantastic and a much needed idea. But that's one thing in Iowa where we love talking to people, friends, and neighbors at any time.
Yeah.
And I think I've told you before, my daughters will not go to a grocery store with me because they know we'll end up talking about
Yep.
taxes. And as the youngest daughter says, I know they want to talk about property taxes, and I don't even know what that is. And
Yeah.
I say, but you will.
So your quick trip to
But you will.
the grocery store turns into an hour.
An hour, but I enjoy that.
That's
So,
great. It's very generous.
Please, any issue or any ideas, any ideas you have about issues or feelings on national or state issues that we have some say in, I love to hear from everyone in House District 74.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Dave, for coming, and I wish you best of luck this session. Get out there and fight the good fight, and remember we're all on the same side, and go Hawks.
Thank you, Eric.
All right. Thank you for joining us on this issue of CoralVision's annual legislative preview show. We hope to see you back here again at the end of the session as I bring Representative Jacoby and Senator Dvorsky back in to talk about how things went and what Iowans can expect for the intersession. And with that, my name is Eric Dickerson for CoralVision, City of Coralville's community television station. Thank you for joining us, and good night.